Hey there and welcome back to another Dreamworks video. And today we'll be returning to everybody's favourite fairy tale world, Shrek, to take a look at one of Dreamworks' most iconic, engaging and best written villains, the Fairy Godmother from Shrek 2. To me, Shrek 2 is one of those rare sequels that in many ways manages to surpass the original film, which is no small feat considering just how good the original Shrek is. And I think the Fairy Godmother character is in a similar boat. Lord Farquaad from Shrek is one of the best and most iconic animated villains of all time. He's funny, he's engaging, and so deeply hateable, with a story that makes sense and fits in well with the world that's being created. Plus, the way he contrasts and conflicts with Shrek's character just really ups the stakes and drama of the story from the get-go. The princely character is actually the awful and cruel villain who wants to lock away the princess for the rest of her days. The hideous ogre is actually the valiant hero who rescues her and lets her live the life that she chooses. And this role reversal was just so interesting and so different from anything a lot of people had really seen before, at least in an animated format, where the majority of animated films and stories really did follow those old archetypes and classical story formats. And so coming off the back of that, I think it would have been hard to try and design a villain that would be able to measure up to the standard that had been set. But that's precisely what they did with the Fairy Godmother. They created a villain who's just as fun, just as engaging, just as iconic, and just as hateable as the Lord of Duloc himself. And so really, that's what this video is going to be about today. Just a bit of appreciation for what is, at least in my view, Dreamworks' best villain across all their franchises, the Fairy Godmother. And so, I guess I should probably give a little bit of a recap of the character and her role in the story for anyone that might be a little bit hazy or unfamiliar. The Fairy Godmother is at first introduced as a kindly and benevolent figure who simply seeks Fiona's eternal happiness and for her to live a life of true love. But this is a facade which is fairly quickly washed away once it's made clear that she'd set things up to put herself into a position of power, namely by setting her son up with Princess Fiona. And I don't think any of this next part is ever actually confirmed within the film or the wider lore itself, but to me, it was always heavily implied that she'd puppet mastered this entire thing from the get-go. Like, we know for a fact that the Fairy Godmother set it up so that Harold would be able to shoot his shot with Lillian, and to do so, she turned him from a frog into a man. And then he was able to have Lillian fall in love with him and marry him. And this works, and he eventually becomes king and has a daughter. All is well in his life, until a witch casts a spell on his daughter, and suddenly he needs to turn to his old friend, the Fairy Godmother, to help him out again. After all, the optics of a princess that turns into an ogre at night are probably not great, and this would not be good for the stability of the kingdom, at least from his perspective. And so he needs a way out of the mess, and the only person he can turn to is the Fairy Godmother. And isn't that just very convenient? Because now he's tied himself in with her even more securely. So surely she was the aforementioned witch, right? Surely she planned all of this. Especially since if you just wanted to break the curse, it would make a lot more sense to not have a castle guarded by a deadly dragon guard your cursed princess. Especially if, the cure is true love's first kiss. Why set it up so that dozens of knights will get massacred along the way when you just want to break the curse? The only reason you do this is if you had somebody in mind that would be able to get past the dragon. And what do you know? She has a son who fits that bill, and since his mother's a fairy godmother with access to all sorts of potions and spells, he'd probably have an easier time getting past the dragon and saving her in the end. So yeah, seems like this is all a setup to get her family in charge and for her to be the power behind the throne. And of course, since Shrek manages to overcome the odds and save the princess, her plans are completely and utterly derailed. And she comes out of all of this looking like a bit of a fool. And so she conspires to have him killed, and then conspires to force Fiona to fall in love with Charming via a magic spell. And her attempts fail, and she dies. See you later, mate. And thus, much like Lord Farquaad, the Fairy Godmother's a really well done example of subverting tropes and character archetypes. In the traditional fairy tale type story, you'd expect the Fairy Godmother to help the brave knight defeat the monster and save the princess, who would in turn fall in love with him and everything would be happy forevermore. Or the Fairy Godmother would help the princess catch the eye of the handsome knight/prince. But here, we have the fairy conspire with the knight to marry off the princess against her will and kill the monster, who the princess loves. And who is also actually a pretty nice and chill guy when you boil it all down. So already, she's an interesting and unique character. She breaks down standard narrative conventions regarding her character archetype and blazes her own trail. It helps her stand out and it makes her feel more special and sets her apart from other villainous characters from across Dreamworks franchises and beyond. This kindly looking, sparkly little fairy woman, who looks like a sweet little grandma with her glasses and a little star wand who flies around in a bubble to grant wishes, is actually a raging narcissist mob boss type figure. A woman who's out for herself and out for her son, and doesn't give two shits whose life she has to ruin along the way. And the juxtaposition of her outward appearance and her true personality, and her role in the story itself, is really intriguing and goes to enhance that cinematic experience and keeps her stuck in your mind after you watch the film, which is something that any good movie should try to do. But her backstory and her role in the narrative itself isn't the only thing that she has going for her. She has a lot of other elements that make her stand out from the crowd, and probably the most important is that she's well written, both as a villain but also just as a character in general. Like I said earlier, you have that first early introduction of the character where she's introduced as being so kind and sickly sweet, and then the mask drops away and you're left with a cruel and manipulative abuser who seeks power at any cost. And from that point onwards, whenever she slips the kindly mask back on, it has an added element that just gets under your skin. Because now you know it's fake, it suddenly feels a whole lot more condescending and belittling, like she's talking to a toddler or an idiot, extending out her speech, slowly, elongating things, and all with this smarmy, holier-than-thou attitude. It just makes her so perfectly hateable. But then this in turn is balanced out by the fact that she's genuinely funny. The scene where they order drive-through while she's threatening Harold's life, her having a sudden musical number when she's trying to mind control Fiona and subject her to a lifetime of sexual assault by her own son. These are just a small taste, where she's doing awful, awful things, and yet it's somewhat softened. You forget about it because she's fun to watch and she makes the audience laugh, which keeps it from getting a little too dark. After all, these are Shrek films. We don't need grimdark here. But then on the other hand, since this humour is so interwoven with the awful things that she does, it prevents the audience growing too attached to her character, from investing in her too much, from liking her too much. And this ensures that by the end of the film, while she's still fun to watch and very enjoyable, you still want to see her get her comeuppance. You don't want her to win. You don't want them to sacrifice Shrek's role as the hero by making her likeable and thus relatable. It's like Lord Farquaad. They're enjoyable to watch as the main villain of the story, and they're well performed by the voice actor that plays them. They're able to get you to hate them, whilst also wanting to see them more on screen. You want to see them defeated, and you want to have the hero's triumph. But the Fairy Godmother goes one step further. She adds that third dimension to the character. She isn't just some outright evil villain like Farquaad who is only out for herself. She also loves her son. She wants the best for him and will do anything to try and achieve that. And so, all these elements do combine to create a character who, at least in my view, is one of the best and most compelling and exciting villains that Dreamworks has ever created, and one that I'm not sure they're ever going to be able to properly top. But of course, that's the end of the video, and I would like to say that these are just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of the Fairy Godmother? Do you agree that she's the be-all and end-all of Dreamworks villains, or maybe you completely disagree and have someone else in mind? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.